The crystal chandelier shattered into 1,000 pieces as the first explosion ripped through the penthouse. Elizabeth Johnson's hands were still wet from scrubbing the counter when the world turned orange and red. The force of the blast threw her against the kitchen wall, knocking the breath from her lungs. For a split second, everything went silent. Then the screaming started. She pushed herself up, her military training cutting through the shock like a knife through butter. 5 years since she'd left the Nigerian army, but her body remembered what to do when chaos erupted. Stay low, assess, move. Through the smoke pouring from the conference room, she could see shapes running, hear men shouting in Korean and English. The penthouse that had been filled with Min-Jae Park's associates just moments ago was now a war zone. Flames licked up the walls where expensive artwork had hung. The acrid smell of burning leather and chemicals filled her nostrils. "Get out! Get out!" someone screamed in Korean. Elizabeth crawled toward the service hallway, the route she'd used 100 times in the 6 months she'd worked here. But something made her stop. Through the smoke, she could see into the conference room where the explosion had originated. Bodies littered the floor, some moving, some not. And there, half buried under a collapsed bookshelf, was Min-Jae Park, the man who'd never once looked at her directly, the man whose coffee she made every morning, whose floors she mopped, whose world she cleaned up after while remaining completely invisible. The feared Korean Mafia boss who controlled half the underground operations in Seoul was trapped, unconscious, abandoned. Elizabeth watched as his head of security, the massive man called Tae-sung, stepped over his boss's body and ran for the exit. She watched as Min-Jae's right-hand man, the one who always wore expensive suits and smelled like cologne, didn't even look back. One by one, every person who'd sworn loyalty to Min-Jae Park saved themselves. "Idiots," Elizabeth muttered in English, her Nigerian accent thick with contempt. She'd seen this before, in Lagos during the Boko Haram raids. When the bullets started flying, loyalty evaporated like water in the desert. Everyone became an animal, thinking only of survival. But Elizabeth had been trained differently. In her unit, they had a saying, "We leave no one behind," even if that someone was a crime lord who'd never acknowledged her existence. She moved fast, keeping low as another small explosion erupted from somewhere deeper in the penthouse. The fire was spreading, feeding on the expensive furnishings and probably accelerated by whatever chemicals had been in that bomb. She had minutes, maybe less. Min-Jae was face down, one arm twisted at an unnatural angle. The bookshelf across his back was solid mahogany, probably weighed 200 pounds. Elizabeth grabbed it with both hands and pulled. It didn't budge. "Come on! Come on!" she hissed, repositioning her grip. She thought of her sister back in Lagos, waiting for the money Elizabeth sent every month. She thought of her nephew who needed school fees. She thought of how stupid it would be to die in a penthouse fire trying to save a man who probably wouldn't remember her name even if she told him. Then she thought of Private Adeyemi, her squad mate who'd bled out in her arms because she hadn't been fast enough, because she'd hesitated. Elizabeth planted her feet, used her legs like they'd taught her in basic training, and pulled with everything she had. The bookshelf shifted. Inch by inch, she dragged it off Min-Jae's back. When it finally crashed to the side, she was already moving, rolling him over, checking for a pulse. Still alive. Unconscious, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, but alive. "You better be worth this," she muttered, hooking her arms under his shoulders. Min-Jae Park was not a small man. Even unconscious, he was dead weight, probably 180 pounds of muscle and expensive Italian suit. Elizabeth had dragged wounded soldiers through worse conditions, but that was years ago, and none of them had been wearing $1,000 shoes. She pulled him toward the exit, her shoulders screaming in protest. The smoke was getting thicker, making her eyes water and her throat burn. Behind her, she could hear the fire roaring, consuming everything in its path. The heat was intense, like standing too close to a bonfire, except this bonfire wanted to kill her. "Wake up!" she grunted, pulling him past what used to be a designer couch. Any time now would be great. Min-Jae's head lolled to the side, blood dripping from his temple onto his white shirt. His face, usually so cold and controlled in the brief glimpses she'd caught while cleaning, was slack. Vulnerable. Human. The main exit was blocked by debris and flames. Elizabeth changed direction, heading for the service elevator she used every day. It was farther, through the kitchen and down a hallway, but it was their only shot. Her lungs were burning, every breath tasting like poison. Her eyes streamed tears from the smoke. But she kept moving, dragging Min-Jae's body across the floors she'd mopped just that morning. In the kitchen, a gas line had ruptured, adding a terrifying hiss to the chaos. Elizabeth's mind raced through the calculations. Fire plus gas equals very bad. They had seconds, not minutes. She abandoned trying to drag him carefully and simply pulled him as fast as she could. His expensive shoes leaving scuff marks on the floor. Through the kitchen, past the walk-in freezer, down the hallway where she'd eaten her lunch in silence 1,000 times. The service elevator doors were closed. Elizabeth slammed her hand on the call button. Nothing happened. She hit it again. Still nothing. No, 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 she breathed, panic finally clawing at the edges of her control. The power must have been cut. Of course it had. The explosion would have taken out the electrical systems. Stupid. She should have known better. Behind her, flames were spreading into the kitchen, following the trail of gas. The emergency stairs. They were at the other end of the hallway, past the laundry room. Elizabeth bent down and slapped Min-Jae's face hard. Wake up! I need you to wake up! His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. She slapped him again, harder. Min-Jae Park, open your eyes. This time, his eyes cracked open, unfocused and confused. He stared at her like he was trying to remember how to see. His lips moved, forming words in Korean she didn't understand. Can you walk? Elizabeth asked, knowing he probably didn't speak much English but hoping adrenaline would translate. Walk? We have to move. Now. She hauled him up, draping his arm over her shoulders. He was semi-conscious, his legs moving but not really supporting his weight. Together, they stumbled down the hallway like two drunks leaving a bar. Every step was agony. Elizabeth's muscles screamed. Her lungs felt like they were filled with glass. But she kept moving. The stairwell door was heavy, designed to be fireproof. Elizabeth shouldered it open and practically fell through it with Min-Jae. The air here was clearer, and she sucked in grateful breaths as she let the door slam shut behind them. They were on the 40th floor. 40 floors down with a semi-conscious crime lord who probably weighed twice what she did. Elizabeth looked at the stairs spiraling down below them and laughed. It was either that or cry. Okay, she said to Min-Jae, whose head was resting on her shoulder. Time to wake up properly. I can't carry you 40 floors. She lowered him to sit on the steps and knelt in front of him. His eyes were open now but still glazed. Blood had dried on the side of his face, making him look like an extra from a horror movie. His expensive suit was torn and covered in soot. Min-Jae, she said firmly, remembering how her sergeant used to snap soldiers out of shock. Look at me. Focus. His eyes slowly found hers. For the first time in 6 months, Min-Jae Park was actually looking at Elizabeth Johnson. Really looking at her. She could see the moment awareness returned, the confusion crossing his features as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Who? He started in English, his accent thick but understandable. Your maid, Elizabeth said bluntly. The one you've never noticed. And right now, the only person standing between you and death. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stand up and we're going to walk down these stairs together. Understand? He blinked at her, processing. Then, incredibly, he nodded. Good. She pulled him to his feet. Let's go. They made it down 5 floors before Min-Jae started to really come around. His steps became more steady, taking more of his own weight. By the 10th floor, he was walking on his own, though Elizabeth kept close in case he stumbled. Where? He asked, his voice rough from smoke inhalation. Down, Elizabeth answered. Out. Away from the fire. My men. Gone. They ran. Every single one of them. She watched him process that information, saw the flash of pain in his eyes that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. He didn't say anything, just kept walking down the endless stairs. At the 20th floor, they heard sirens outside. Fire trucks, police, ambulances. The building would be surrounded by now. Elizabeth's mind raced ahead, thinking through the implications. Min-Jae Park was supposed to be dead. That explosion had been meant to kill him, and everyone would assume it had. If he showed up alive, whoever wanted him dead would try again. And she'd been seen. She'd been in that penthouse. If anyone had survived, if any cameras had caught her dragging Min-Jae out, she was a witness. A liability. In her 6 months of working on the edges of Seoul's underworld, she'd learned enough to know what happened to liabilities. "We can't go out the main entrance," she said suddenly. Min-Jae looked at her sharply, and she saw intelligence behind those dark eyes. He was thinking the same thing she was. "Basement," he said. "Service exit. You know it? I'm a maid. I know every service entrance in this building." They changed direction at the next landing, heading for the basement level instead of the lobby. Elizabeth's legs were shaking from exhaustion, her throat raw from smoke, but she pushed forward. They'd come too far to die now. The basement was dark and smelled like concrete and old water. Elizabeth led the way through the maintenance corridors, past the boiler room and storage areas, toward the delivery entrance she'd used on her first day of work. The steel door was locked from the inside, but the crash bar opened it easily. They emerged into a service alley behind the building. The night air had never tasted so sweet. Elizabeth leaned against the wall, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion. Her hands were shaking, her entire body hurt, but they were alive. Min-Jae stood in the alley, looking back at his building. From here, they could see smoke pouring from the 40th floor, see the lights of emergency vehicles painting the street red and blue. His empire, his fortress, was burning. "Why?" he asked, turning to look at Elizabeth. She met his eyes, those dark eyes that had looked through her for 6 months. "Because everyone else ran. You don't know me. I know you're a human being. That's enough." He studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. In a way, he was, "What's your name?" "Elizabeth Johnson." "Elizabeth," he repeated, the syllables strange in his Korean accent. "You saved my life. Don't thank me yet. Whoever set that bomb will realize you're not dead." "And they saw me." She pushed off from the wall, forcing her exhausted body to move. "We need to go. Somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't look. I have safe houses." "Do you?" "Because I'm guessing whoever planned this knew about those two. This was an inside job, Min-Jae. Someone close to you wanted you dead." She watched him absorb that, saw his jaw tighten. He pulled out his phone from his jacket pocket. The screen was cracked but still working. He scrolled through his contacts, then stopped. His finger hovered over a name, then moved to another. He looked at the names of people he'd trusted, people he'd built his organization with, and Elizabeth saw the moment the reality hit him. He didn't know who to call. He couldn't trust anyone. Min-Jae Park, the man who controlled an empire, who had hundreds of people at his command, was alone. "I know a place," Elizabeth said quietly. "It's not much, but it's off the grid. No one knows about it." He looked at her with something like surprise. "You would help me more? I've come this far. Might as well see it through." She started walking down the alley, away from the sirens and chaos. "Come on, before someone sees us." Min-Jae hesitated for just a moment, then followed. The Korean Mafia boss falling into step behind the Nigerian maid who'd just saved his life. They walked through Seoul's back alleys for 30 minutes, avoiding main streets and cameras. Elizabeth led them through a maze of narrow passages and service roads she'd learned during her months of exploring the city on her days off. She'd always been good at staying invisible, at finding the spaces between the places people looked. The warehouse district was quiet at this time of night. Most of the buildings were abandoned, waiting for the development boom that kept getting delayed. Elizabeth had found this particular warehouse 3 months ago, had been using it as a quiet place to study for her nursing certification exams. It wasn't much, just a corner of an old storage facility with a working lock on the door, but it was hers. And more importantly, it was unknown. She used her key to open the side door and ushered Min-Jae inside. The space was dark except for the moonlight coming through grimy windows. Elizabeth had set up a small camp here. A battery-powered lamp, some blankets, a few books, and a first aid kit she'd assembled from the pharmacy. She turned on the lamp, and warm light filled the corner. Min-Jae looked around at her humble setup, and she couldn't read his expression. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to the cleanest blanket. "Let me look at your head." He obeyed, which surprised her. She knelt beside him and opened the first aid kit. The gash on his forehead wasn't as bad as it had looked with all the blood, but it would need cleaning. She worked efficiently, using antiseptic wipes to clean the wound. He flinched but didn't pull away. "You know medicine?" he asked. "Studied it in the army. I'm working on my nursing certification now." She applied antibiotic ointment and a butterfly bandage. "Or I was before tonight." "The army?" "Nigerian army. 5 years. Left 3 years ago." He was quiet while she worked, but she could feel his eyes on her. It was strange, having his full attention after months of being invisible. "Your arm," she said, noticing how he was holding his left arm against his body. "Let me see." He shrugged off his jacket with difficulty, revealing a shirt sleeve torn and bloodied. When she carefully rolled up the sleeve, she found a deep gash running from his elbow to his wrist. Not life-threatening, but it needed stitches. "This is going to hurt," she warned, pulling out the suture kit she'd bought for practice. "I've had worse." She believed him. She'd seen the scars on his hands and knuckles while cleaning his office, had noticed the old bullet wound on his shoulder once when his shirt had been unbuttoned. Min-Jae Park had lived a violent life. Elizabeth worked in silence, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. The stitches were neat and even, something she was proud of. When she finished and wrapped his arm in clean gauze, she sat back on her heels. "There. You'll live. Thanks to you." He flexed his arm carefully, testing the stitches. "Twice now. Who's counting?" A small smile crossed his face. There and gone so quickly she almost missed it. Then his expression hardened. He pulled his phone out again and stared at the cracked screen. "I need to know who survived," he said. "Who ran? Who stayed? Who planned this? And if you call anyone, you might be calling the person who tried to kill you." "I know." His finger hovered over the screen. "But I have to know." Elizabeth watched him dial a number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered, rapid Korean that she couldn't understand. Min-Jae's face went through several expressions. Relief, anger, disbelief. He spoke quickly, his voice hard and commanding even in his injured state. The conversation lasted 5 minutes. When he hung up, his face was pale. "Well?" Elizabeth asked. "That was Ji-woo, my logistics manager. He wasn't at the meeting. He says..." Min-Jae paused, swallowing hard. "He says they've recovered 6 bodies from the penthouse. 3 of my men and 3 from the Hwang gang. My lieutenant, Dae-young, is telling everyone I'm dead. He's already moving to take over my territories." "Your lieutenant? The one who always wore the gray suits?" "Yes." "He's the one who left first," Elizabeth said quietly. "He stepped over you and ran." Min-Jae closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked exhausted and defeated. "Dae-young has been with me for 8 years. Since the beginning." "I'm sorry." He opened his eyes and looked at her. "Why? You don't know me. You don't know my world. I know betrayal. I know what it feels like to trust someone who doesn't deserve it." She thought of her ex-boyfriend, the one who'd emptied her bank account and disappeared. It hurts the same everywhere. They sat in silence for a moment, 2 strangers brought together by fire and betrayal. Outside, the city hummed with its usual night sounds. Inside the warehouse, time seemed to have stopped. Min-Jae's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his expression darkened. "Ji-woo says there's footage. Security cameras caught someone pulling me from the conference room. A woman in cleaning clothes." Elizabeth's blood went cold. "That's me." "Yes, and now Dae-young is looking for you. He's put out word that you're a witness who needs to be eliminated." Of course he has. Elizabeth laughed bitterly. I save your life, and all I get is a death sentence. I won't let anything happen to you. She looked at him incredulously. You? You're supposed to be dead. Your own organization is hunting me. What exactly are you going to do? Min-Jae met her eyes, and she saw steel in his gaze. I'm going to take back what's mine. I'm going to make Dae-young pay for his betrayal. And I'm going to keep you alive while I do it. That's a nice speech, but you saved my life, Elizabeth Johnson. In my culture, that creates a debt. A sacred debt. I will protect you, no matter what it costs me. I don't want your protection. I want my normal life back. That's not possible now. The moment you pulled me from that fire, your normal life ended. His voice was gentle but firm. I'm sorry, but this is the reality. We're in this together now. Elizabeth wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she could just disappear and everything would be fine. But she'd seen enough of the criminal world to know better. Dae-young wouldn't stop looking for her. She was a loose end, a witness, a threat to his takeover. She would never be safe unless Min-Jae reclaimed his empire. Or unless Min-Jae was actually dead. The thought crossed her mind for just a moment. She could kill him right now. End this before it got worse. But even as she thought it, she knew she couldn't. That wasn't who she was. Fine, she said finally. But I have conditions. Name them. First, my family. My sister and nephew in Lagos. If something happens to me, I need to know they'll be taken care of. Done. Give me their information. I'll have money transferred tomorrow. Second, when this is over, I want out. Completely out. New identity, new city, whatever it takes. I want my life back. Agreed. And third, she hesitated, then pushed forward. You treat me like an equal. Not a maid. Not a servant. Not some helpless woman who needs protecting. I was a soldier. I can help you. But only if you respect me. Min-Jae studied her face for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. Partners. Elizabeth shook his hand, his grip firm and warm. Partners. To be continued in Part 2. If you're enjoying this story of Elizabeth and Min-Jae's dangerous alliance, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Hit that like button if you want to see more stories like this, and drop a comment telling me what you think will happen. Will Elizabeth and Min-Jae survive? Will they catch the traitor? Will them being partners lead to something else? Will an affair spike from this? Let me know your predictions below.